Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum. In this monologue, I am going to discuss and compare the concept of riba with interest. The term riba is an Arabic term that may be used as a verb or a noun. As a verb, it implies to grow or swell, while as a noun, it may imply growth or abnormal increase. Riba, erroneously equated with usury, has a much wider connotation as it is expounded in the Koran. The litmus test for determining whether riba is present in a transaction is the element of exploitation for multiplying one's wealth in an unfair manner. It must be appreciated that riba is a theological term, while interest is an economic concept with entirely different meanings. However, due to poor understanding of the subject of economics and finance, the theologians over a period of centuries could not discern the real difference between the two concepts and imputed wrong conclusions on the basis of charging excessive interest by Jews and other nations in a loan transaction. Due to the complexity of this topic, this monologue is subdivided into 4 parts for better comprehension and understanding of the listeners and viewers. This part will explain the concept of riba. It will make a comparison between riba and trading attributes of permissible trading and the instances where riba may be present in a trading transaction. The possible examples of transactions where riba may be present on the part of at least one of the parties include 1. A domestic loan arrangement, 2. Trading or business activities, 3. Commercial loans, 4. Distribution of inheritance share, 5. Excessive accumulation of wealth by any means, etc. There are about 38 verses of Quran that will be quoted to demonstrate the viewpoint adopted in this monologue. Quran is the eternal guidance for mankind in all walks of lives. It is therefore imperative that human beings may improve their understanding on a particular issue or subject in the light of Quranic wisdom and worldly knowledge that has evolved with the passage of time. Sticking to past human knowledge under the garb of taqleed or blind following is prohibited by the Quran, that stresses upon human reason to unfold the Quranic truth in the light of evolving phases of human civilization. Riba, erroneously equated with usury in English, literally means growth or abnormal increase in the Arabic language. There are numerous references in the Quran where riba is condemned by God with reference to some benchmark or standard. A critical reading and analysis of these verses reveal that the concept of riba, as expounded in the Quran, is holistic in its approach. It is not just confined to excessive interest or usury, or exchanging inferior goods for superior goods, as usually maintained by a certain class of scholars. In reality, it applies to all types of exploitative additions that lead to concentration of wealth in few hands at the expense of other party or segment of the society. In the light of Quranic injunctions, riba may be defined as an unfair monetary addition that results in concentration of wealth in the hands of one party through exploitation of the other party. When someone plans or strives to get excessive gain in any form, even though under the parameters of man-made laws, still it will always be at the expense or cost of other individuals and thus detrimental to the society at large. Riba also includes a situation where certain segments of society usurp major resources of production through legal or illegal means at the expense of weaker segments of society. This abnormality will ultimately destroy the social fabric of society by widening the gap between the rich and the poor, and this may result in a revolution and anarchy sooner or later. In this thesis, an attempt has been made to enlighten the reader about the rational aspect of the concept of riba based on Quranic wisdom. Few simple illustrations and diagrams have also been included to demonstrate complex legal, financial, and economic issues in a meaningful manner. It has been ensured that the whole theme may be explained in a simple language, avoiding technical jargons. Where any technical jargons are used, their meanings have been clearly explained without breaking the rhythm of the theme of the monologue. The concept of riba or usury is beautifully explained in chapter 3, verse 130 of Quran in the following words. You who believe, do not consume riba or usury, doubled and redoubled. Be mindful of God so that you may prosper. This verse of Quran is the cornerstone on the subject of riba. It explicitly defines riba as a means of multiplying one's wealth many times over, that is, doubled and redoubled. The phrase, be mindful of God, in this context also highlights the fact that doubling and redoubling one's wealth by whatever means is a repulsive act in the sight of God. Any practice that results in multiplying one's wealth many times over or in an abnormal manner is covered in the definition of riba. As stated earlier, its examples may include excessive interest on a business loan transaction, abnormal profits in a trade, hoarding of wealth beyond one's legitimate needs, depriving kith and kin of their due share inheritance, snatching away property of orphans and destitutes, spending extravagantly on life and style, etc. It also highlights a peculiar trait called greed that is associated with persons who practice riba in different manners. The person who tries to double and redouble his wealth is a greedy person like Korah, Moses' contemporary, who amassed wealth but never gave part of it as charity in the name of God. He was finally bound to ditch in this world and the life in hereafter. Please refer to chapter 8 verses 76 to 83 of the glorious Quran. When we multiply our wealth unjustly, we become prey to the curse of greed and selfishness. This is contrary to the teachings of brotherhood, that is altruism, taught by Quran, which demands sacrifice and fair dealing with other Muslim brothers and humanity at large. This fact is emphasized in chapter 49, verses 9 and 10 in the following words. Verse 9 reads, if two groups of the believers fight, you should try to reconcile them. If one of them is oppressing the other, fight the oppressors until they submit to God's command. Then make a just and even-handed reconciliation between the two of them. God loves those who are even-handed. Verse 9 highlights the fact that oppression in any form, whether physical, financial, or psychological, is a repugnant act in the sight of God. Therefore, all believers are commanded to fight back the oppressor. Emphasis is also laid on even-handed or equitable reconciliation between the two parties, so that no oppressor may exploit the weak position of other person to gain any undue advantage. Verse 10 reads, the believers are brothers, so make peace between your two brothers, and be mindful of God so that you may be given mercy. This verse sets the degree of relationship between believers. It stresses that all believers, regardless of their ethnic or social division, are brothers in the sight of God. Therefore, if the two brothers fight for any reason, all other believers must try to make equitable peace between the two brothers. This is important to ensure that the moral fabric of the integrity of Islamic Brotherhood remain intact. God appreciates this act by declaring that whosoever will make peace between the two warring brothers will be given mercy. Since wealth is considered a sign of power and status in the society, practicing riba or usury creates two classes in the society, that is, the rich or influential, and the poor or deprived one. The influential segments of the society ultimately grab all types of power in the society and implement such policies that make them more rich and powerful. This vicious multiplier effect may lead to emergence of two sequential scenarios. At the first instance, the weaker segments of the society become totally dependent on the richer segments of the society, leading to a situation where richer people try to become gods, commanding the weaker segments of the society. But ultimately, the second scenario emerges, where the gap between the rich and the poor widens to an alarming extent, and this exploitative situation gives birth to some form of revolution or civil war to grab economic means by different segments of the society. Thus, riba that is exploitative in nature gives birth to exploitative regimes that are ultimately rooted out one way or the other. Therefore, God commands all human beings to implement such economic policies where riba or usury cannot be practiced by the traders, the creditors, the black marketers, the hoarders, the wealthy, and so on. There should be efficient and effective industry regulators constituted by the state that must watch and regulate the behavior of all those who practice riba or usury under different garbs to minimize chances of exploitation in economic transactions of all dimensions. Chapter 2, verse 275 of the glorious Koran differentiates between riba and trading in an eloquent manner in the following words. Those that live on riba shall rise up before God like men whom Satan has demented by his touch. For they claim that riba is like trading, but God has permitted trading and forbidden riba. He that receives an admonition from his Lord and mends his ways may keep what he has already earned. His fate is in the hands of God. But he that pays no heed shall be consigned to hellfire and shall remain in it forever. In this verse of the Quran, riba is compared with trading or business to clearly differentiate between the two. The contextual interpretation of the verse implies that the term trading means lawful and equitable trading, where the buyer and the seller enters into a transaction at arm's length principle with their free consent and get fair consideration in return through mutual bargain. This will ensure that the legitimate interests of both the parties are fairly looked after, and the trader will not exploit the buyer to increase his profits manifold. Please refer to verse 130 of chapter 3 for definition of riba given in the Quran. Since riba is a heinous sin with serious socio-economic and societal implications, therefore anyone practicing riba will be recognized as a friend of Satan on the judgment day, and he will be confined to the hellfire forever. The phrase men whom Satan has been demented by his touch alludes towards this fact. A related question may be, how is it possible that riba or usury may be present in trading? The answer to this question is provided in categorical terms in verse 29 of chapter 4 of the glorious Quran in the following words. You who believe, do not wrongfully consume each other's wealth, but trade by mutual consent. When the seller tries to sell his merchandise at inflated prices to earn abnormal profits, he is trying to multiply his wealth by wrongfully consuming wealth of the buyer. The buyer may be on a weaker footing due to poor bargaining power, incomplete information about prices, and persuasive marketing employed by the seller. The punishment for ignoring God's command is explained in chapter 4, verse 30 of the following Quran in the following words. If any of you does these things out of hostility and injustice, we shall make him suffer fire that is easy for God. The punishment for practicing riba in trading is confinement into the hellfire. These verses clearly highlight the fact that any trading that is directed at consuming others' wealth is a great sin. Permissible trading in the sight of God is always with mutual consent, fair consideration, and with free bargaining power of both the parties, as depicted in the following diagram. The concept of arm's length transaction is to ensure that both parties in the trading are acting in their own self-interest and are not subject to any pressure or duress from the other party. Free consent will be absent if the transaction is influenced by one party through fraud, misrepresentation, undue influence, duress, etc. of any type to obtain consent of the other party. While fair consideration implies that both the parties in a transaction get benefit of more or less equal value in broad terms. If one party tries to exploit the situation for his vested interest in the name of trading, for example seeking abnormal profits or exchanging inferior goods under misrepresentation, he is practicing riba, and God condemns this act severely, because the punishment for committing the sin of riba is perpetual confinement in the hellfire. A related question may be, what should be the size of normal or acceptable profits that may be permissible under a given situation? This is a complicated issue, and the exact answer to this question will depend upon multiple factors that may work independently and concurrently in different situations. Some of the key factors may include: 1. Classification of goods and services into normal and snob appeal goods and services. 2. Social trends and consumers' preferences that are prevalent at the time of occurrence of business transaction. 3. Form of market structure such as perfect competition, imperfect competition that may include duopolies, oligopolies, and monopolistic competition, and monopoly situation. 4. Marketing technique employed by the seller such as persuasive marketing and informative marketing. 5. Pricing strategy employed by the seller such as price skimming and penetration pricing. Normal goods and services, for example eatables, clothing, and lodging that is affordable by the majority of persons living in a society, are demanded and consumed by majority of the people, and their prices are subject to the laws of demand and supply. For example, in case of normal goods and services, there is an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and its price, implying higher demand when price falls and vice versa. For such category of goods and services, the normal profits under a competitive and fair business environment may usually vary between 25 to 50% of the selling price. In case of imperfect competition like monopoly or oligopoly, the permissible profit margin may not exceed 100% of your cost of production and other related expenses, because doubling wealth many times over implies riba. The second category of goods and services are acquired for ostentatious purposes and for snob appeal. For example, expensive food and clothing, lodging, means of transportation, etc., that is affordable by very rich segments of the society. Their prices are not subject to the laws of demand and supply as such. For snob appeal goods and services like diamonds, villas, limousines, services rendered by a celebrity in a private gathering, etc., the profit margin is always abnormal because such goods and services are consumed by the richest segments of the society, who can always afford high prices to acquire unique goods and services for show-off purposes. Therefore, in case of trading in normal goods, riba may or may not be practiced by the seller depending upon the type of market structure. While for snob appeal goods, riba is always present on the part of the buyer and the seller. The buyer practices riba by buying abnormally expensive goods and services just for snob appeal, a sheer exploitation and wastage of resources that could be spent on other deserving human beings. While the seller practices riba by charging very high prices without any relationship to the actual cost of the goods and services, thus making abnormal profits for personal benefits. Interestingly, such type of riba is always overlooked and it is rather accepted as a norm of modern business and lifestyle. It is a common observation that prices of goods and services are also subject to social trends and consumer preferences. When some new product or service has become a great choice amongst the buyers, its demand increases manifold and the sellers are in a position to charge higher prices or sell large quantities of such merchandise to earn maximum revenues. In such a situation, the consumer may be inclined to pay a higher price for it to become part of the community using that product. This temptation on the part of the buyer may be exploited by the seller to increase his profits. So, depending upon the level of aggregate demand and aggregate supply at any given point in time, the equilibrium price may be agreed by the mutual bargaining power of the buyers and the sellers. Depending upon other variables as mentioned in slide 9, the element of riba may be present or absent in such a business transaction if the net profit margin has exceeded 100%, that is equal to doubling the wealth of the seller. Market structure or form of market is another important determinant that may provide evidence whether riba or usury may be present or absent in a business transaction. The science of economics broadly classifies a market into different segments or types to demonstrate the effect of each form of market on the size of available profits. At one extreme of this spectrum is perfect competition, while at the other extreme is the monopoly. Between these two extremes, there are a variety of possible scenarios of imperfect competition that are subclassified into a duopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. In a perfect competition, there are a large number of buyers and sellers that determine the equilibrium price of goods and services through mutual bargaining power. Since no individual buyer or seller can influence the price of goods and services, therefore the possibility of practicing riba in such a market may be difficult. In a monopoly form of market, a single seller or group of sellers, that is a cartel, may control the supply and price of merchandise. This dominant status may enable the seller to charge exorbitant and unfair prices for his merchandise to multiply his wealth at the expense of underprivileged buyers. So the presence of riba in a monopoly situation has the greatest possibility. In any other form of market structure that is covered under imperfect competition, the existence or absence of riba in a trade may be discerned on the basis of empirical evidence at the occurrence of a business transaction. A related phenomena that may promote riba on the part of the seller to multiply sales growth in an abnormal manner is employing persuasive marketing techniques. This is a marketing ploy where true features of goods and services are camouflaged under the garb of enticing and alluring propaganda and implicit misrepresentation. The consumer is lured to buy a product by highlighting the misleading and spillover features of that product. For example, the sales of liquor or tobacco may be promoted by showing young females in the advertisement to lure young men to consume these intoxicants by concealing the health hazards of these products. The fair approach is informative marketing technique that simply provides information about the true features of a product to enable the buyer to make a rational buying decision. For example, if the seller intends to sell a car, he should provide information about the technical specifications and overt features of the vehicle so that the customer may make a rational choice. It is clear from this discussion that persuasive marketing techniques may be employed to practice riba in a trade, while informative marketing techniques have no such direct bearing on practice of riba. Pricing strategies are part of marketing policy adopted by a business to promote its trade. In real life, a number of pricing strategies may be available to businesses to achieve sales growth. However, to keep the discussion simple, only two of the key strategies may be discussed here. One pricing strategy is called penetration pricing, where the goods and services are sold at lower than the competitors' prices to attract large market segment. Since the price charged is usually lower than the competitor's price, the possibility of presence of riba in such a situation is minimal. The second category is called price skimming, where a much higher price is charged by a firm to attract affluent buyers. This is possible where the product offers unique features and certain segment of buyers may be lured towards a new product through persuasive propaganda. Evidently, in such a situation, the element of riba is highly likely to be part of the business transaction. On the basis of discussion made so far, it is evident that riba or usury may be present in various business transactions if such business transactions are not carried out in the light of injunctions of the glorious Koran. Looking from a broader perspective, the relevant verses of the Quran quoted in this monologue categorically promote free and competitive trading, as opposed to a monopoly situation or hoarding, where abnormal profits are sought by the monopolists and hoarders at the expense of helpless buyers through manipulative marketing techniques. Following this verse of the Quran, it is incumbent upon the state to watch behavior of monopolies, including duopolies, oligopolies, and price cartels, to ensure that they do not resort to riba in the name of trading. Similarly, states should also regulate trading of snob appeal goods and services to ensure that such transactions do not widen the gap between the rich and the poor to an alarming extent. These verses therefore lays down the foundation of trading in a true Islamic state. Interestingly, all welfare economies condemn riba, that is excess profits in this case, and try to regulate the market behavior through industry regulators. But Quran provided this economic framework even 1500 years ago in a simple but an eloquent manner. I conclude the first segment of my monologue on the complex subject of riba with a prayer that Allah Almighty may bless this effort. Please do subscribe and share my channel for updates. It's absolutely free.